partway through.
Okay, so we're recording as of right now, everybody. Hi, Hank.
Hi, Rob.
Let me just get out of this. Okay, so everybody, hi, Paul. We can see you. Good. And Ben, are you going to turn your video on, or are you hiding someplace?
If you want to see me slurping my soup, I can turn it on.
Okay, that's fine. Stu just finished his lunch, so we're watching everybody eat lunch. So
Breakfast. We're doing breakfast on the West Coast.
You guys are out west. Ben's on the East Coast. So anyway, this is the welcome to the weekly meeting of the Rotary E-Club of Wash. This is January 7th, 2020. Oh, I got the wrong date. I'm so surprised. We usually begin the meeting with the Rotary four-way test, so we'll do the same this week. Of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? So we're going to go around and introduce each other. And Paul, you've already been introduced. You can introduce yourself or let Stu do it again, either way. So I'm Bob Chagrasulis. I'm the president of the club. I'm an engineer and a trauma surgeon by training, and I'm calling in from Maine in the United States. So let's go to my right. Chuck?
Hi, I'm Chuck Fisher. I'm a urban planner calling in from Kaiser, Oregon.
Okay, and Hank?
Henk Holzslag. I'm engineer, background engineer. I work with smart centers in different countries, which are training centers for water and sanitation technologies. And I'm talking from the Netherlands. I'm in the Netherlands. I live in the Netherlands and I work sometimes in Africa.
Excellent. Ben?
Hi, I'm Ben Tidwell. I am the WASH Research and Behavior Change Lead for World Vision, and I'm calling from muggy and cold, rainy DC.
Okay, Paul?
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul White. I'm a civil engineer, structural engineer, currently working with the consultant Stantec, and I just joined because I'm interested in learning more about TI.
Well, welcome. Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy Gilbert. I'm a club member and a Rotary Past District Governor and the Executive Director of Transform International in the States. Oh, I'm calling in from Victoria, BC, Canada.
And since he's sort of your guest, but he's all of our guests, I'll let you introduce Stu again.
I think Stu could introduce himself this time. He'll do a way better job.
Why don't you do it for us? There you go.
I'm Stu Martin, 2/3 of the way through my life, former engineer, recovering lawyer, been doing WASH since 2007 at the formation of WASREG at the Salt Lake City conference. And as Nancy pointed out last time, I'm largely self-taught. While I did take some engineering in water treatment, when it comes to WASH work, I'm a student of Rotary, of global grants, of water, sanitation, and hygiene, and development in general.
Excellent. Well, we're going to move right into it. I don't have any club business unless somebody else does. We've discussed meetings. Nancy will be sending around a notice about our next club meeting and the next board meeting. Oops. Okay, good. So you're on, Stu. I see you've already claimed our screens. Go ahead.
Thank you. So this is an outline which I will send to Nancy for distribution to everyone when we're done. I have beefed it up since the talk last Thursday. It contains concepts that I think are useful in understanding sanitation in general, some special topics, and then at the very end, some Rotary insights. And in the middle are a bunch of WASH resources. Ben will certainly recognize these, most of you will. They come from a variety of places. I won't have time to go through this outline because it's 3 pages long and has lots of dense links to websites, video clips, PDFs, etc. But I am going to talk about some of the concepts that are here. I'm also going to go through a slideshow that I have, slideshow that I sent out earlier, but a newer version of it, if you might say. Where is it? Well, Okay, I'll find that in a second. But in the meantime, this set of web links, I am going to go through. Most of these are in the material, but I wanted to show them to you. There are two really good sites to understand the overview of water sanitation and hygiene, but especially sanitation, our topic today. Gapminder is one of those where you can pick. This is all from public data from governments, UNICEF, WHO. You can pick whatever ordinate and abscissa you want, and then after you've picked it, see how it changes over time. And the areas of the world are grouped by color. You can speed up or slow down the changes. You can hover over individual dots that are countries and see how they go. You can add trails. You can limit the search to just certain areas. It is a great self-education and educate the public tool for health in general, but especially for water sanitation and hygiene. So I recommend it. Here's one that I put together with life expectancy as compared to how many people have at least basic sanitation services. Now this data only starts in 2000, but you'll see the red countries, which is Southeast Asia, big ones, India and China, move along quite nicely between 2000 and 2015. These blue countries, which you'll recognize are African countries, are pretty much stuck still in the 10 to 30% range for access to rural sanitation. Their life expectancy is a little lower, but not that much lower. So take a look at Gapminder. And the other side is ourworldindata.org. And it has compilations from many places. So as an example, here's a chart showing by age, how many million people die from diarrhea at different time zones, at different times, you know, from 1990 to 2017. Here's another one that shows death rates from unsafe sanitation. Obviously, sub-Saharan Africa is a big area that is difficult, but here's the time chart as it changes over time. You'll see some areas like India made significant improvement. Thailand went to near zero, but we still have lots of sanitation issues. And by country, you can see the number of deaths. So really nice resource. There's a whole lot of things, as you can see on the side here. Access to sanitation, what share of people have access, what facilities have coverage. Really interesting stuff. WHO has a number of fact sheets. That's one of the links I've given you on environmental sanitation. So everything from open air defecation to poor flush latrines, septic tanks, hospitals and health centers. Nice fact sheets there. COST is a great training resource. They have posters, training materials, etc. This is just the sanitation group, 200 resources. And here's an example, a training manual that comes from EMFO, I think, Nepal. And you can see the kind of lesson planning that is here, ready for our projects to use. OCFO is a great site. It has evolved a lot over the years. They have water, sanitation, hygiene. They also have a specialty area on rainwater harvesting, on sustainability, on decision tools, which is a newer one. But you can look at all the different kinds of toilets, how it's collected, how things are conveyed, how treatment is done, etc. And each one of these has an article. They often have resources, diagrams, plans, pros and cons, and references. So Aquapedia, like it is, an encyclopedia. It's largely funded by the Netherlands government, but a great resource. WEDIC, Nancy and I went there a couple of years ago, and people who practice WASH from all around the world come and present papers and critique each other. I was like a sponge soaking it all in, had some great conversations, met some people, and then the materials are available here. I've given you a link to the big DVD of materials which I received in the mail. So there's stuff from the presentations, there's WETIC guides, there's books, there's materials that were presented. And this RWSN stick, it's a big compilation of rural water supply network resources, all given to us on a stick. It's now available to you here in Google Drive. There's the RWSN site with its quarterly newsletter, and they have lots of resources as well. I'm zipping through these because otherwise it would take too much time and I wouldn't get to your questions. Urine diverting dry toilets. This is just one example of the work that Susanna has done in Wikipedia to explain to the public and give resources. So there's the outline of topics. And like all Wikipedia articles, it is commented on by many people. And at the end, there's a bunch of resources and external links to other things. If you guys want to stop me at any point and ask questions or make a comment, feel free to do that. WASRIC has some technical guides. Some of these were done when Nancy and I were there. They're so a little bit long in the tooth, but still great overviews. This is the one on sanitation, which our friend Bill Chapman started. It may have been edited by somebody else more recently because it says March 2019. But it's a great overview of all the considerations to think about, or many of the considerations to think about in planning a sanitation project, in choosing toilets, in looking at soil studies, what people use. There's diagrams. This is a 3-hole fiberglass pan, which we developed for Indonesia. This is a compendium of WashTec's technologies just sort of laid out by WaterAid, and they're asking for feedback. So if you want to go to that site, look over those. There are many, many books and studies and conferences like those in Durban on fecal sludge management. Somebody asked last time, give us an overview of how you manage it from beginning to end. What's the system? So this is a sample report, actually a very good one, that has been done by EWAG and WETIC. How you quantify it, different ways of treating it. Let me zoom in a little so you can see treatment mechanisms, methods for collecting, overview of treatment technologies, settling tanks, dry beds. I mean, it's just a thorough review, 400 pages of review. So one could get lost in it. And I wanted to point out 2 business models for dealing with sanitation that seem to be working: Sanergy and Sanivation. Sanergy has developed colorful, clean, blue and green stations where people can come and use the toilet, know that it's clean, and then they have a franchise business model where people come and clean those, extract the urine and the feces, bring them to treatment centers. They get paid. The people who use the toilets pay, and the people who service them get paid and earn a living that way. Sanergy also now does consulting for other organizations, holding themselves out somewhat expert, have done TED Talks, etc. So great resource in East Africa. Sanivation, and Paul can talk about this because he's now working with Sanivation on the design of a central treatment system in Nairobi. But one of the innovations they have come up with is how to convert human feces into briquettes. Some countries, like I think Kenya, have banned the use of charcoal because of the pollution aspects. But you can make a briquette with binder and some biomass, compress it, dry it, and sell it in the marketplace that is almost as efficient. In fact, I think, no, not here. Yeah, I do have a link. I think it's in the material. A link to a study that was done by a WETIC master's student, finding a little better way to improve it. So Sanivation is developing paid services and methods for marketing fecal material that can get us out of the donor government aid method and into a more sustainable program. This comes from NIH. It's a really nice summary of many aspects of sanitation. So I included this link, but one of them that I wanted to point out is, and let me just put it in my materials here. We talk about behavior change because it's one of the biggest challenges to get people to use sanitation, use toilets, keep them clean, not avoid open defecation, etc. And this study points out some of the reasons why people make the change. We think of it usually as a healthcare related thing, and of course it does have health benefits. But for the user, especially in a rural context, oftentimes they just want some privacy when they poop or pee, or they like something a little more modern than their traditional hole in the ground, or they don't want to have snakes or animals interfering with them. I've noticed sometimes people think it's cool to have the new toilet, whether it's a pour flush latrine or a fiberglass pan or something, you know. They can point to it with pride when their friends and neighbors come to visit, their family come to visit, they can say, come, look at my toilet.
Can I jump in there
please,
a bit,
please.
Stu? And I'd love to hear other people's experiences, particularly Ben's, because there are also the studies you hear about, particularly I think from India, that support the idea that people actually really love going out into the fields, pooping out there with their friends. They get the news from the morning. It's, you know, the wind is blowing. So, you know, it's interesting. How do you go about changing social norms so that you can begin to build a desire for an improved toilet?
It's a great question and a big challenge. I have personally observed that very thing. Young boys out in the field, no pants, pooping wherever they want, breezes blowing over them. They love it.
Yeah, feels good.
Why would they walk all the way back home to school to be in a hot, smelly box? Yeah, it makes no sense. Ben, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge issue, and one that, you know, comes from us presuming health benefits are what drives adoption of a lot of these preventive health, you know, sort of wash technologies. And I think, you know, two things. One is that having been in some of these places and seeing the toilet that's presented as the alternative to open defecation, like I would probably choose open defecation. And I think it may not be irrational, even from a health perspective, if everyone's going in this low quality, hot, smelly box instead of going out in a rural area, you know, unless there's groundwater contamination or, you know, things like that. At least it, you know, it may not be a crazy idea. I think, you know, the reason that I don't think about it is because I have a really nice toilet nearby I can use. And then I can come up with other ways to, you know, other excuses isn't quite the right word, but other ways to fulfill the socialization needs. And so I think, you know, it's probably something about better technology, but then, yeah, there's got to be a real conversation that, you know, if it, you know, particularly it's common conversation around women in India, this is their time for socialization. You know, you've got to engage more broadly than just, you know, a bit of engineering, you know.
And as someone pointed out on Thursday, it's a long process. You can't expect to introduce toilets, have them built, and people suddenly start using them. It will usually take years.
Which is a really important point, because I think in many Rotary programs, the time frame that's allowed for behavior change and is very short. But in reality, it needs to be multiple years. And we don't tend to build that into our grant applications or expectations.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So if you don't mind, Stu, I'm curious, Ben, when you guys do sanitation projects, what kind of time frame are you looking at for support, like that long-term behavior change support?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge. I mean, I mean, at World Vision, we have sort of area programs that we work in. And so we're talking like 15 or 20 years in an area. But even though we have that long, it doesn't mean automatically everyone's happy with, let's wait 15 or 20 years to see change. And so I think, even when you look at these big health trials, you think, okay, it's behavior is one thing, but even then you've got to use it over time for these pathogens to get out of the environment. I mean, we think they certainly don't go overnight. So yeah, I think it's a real thing. But I mean, I think the flip side of that is I was looking at some data recently about changes in attitudes, like in higher income countries, even on policy questions, drugs, some sort of hot button issues. It's like, it's actually not so much that people's minds are changed radically, except for a few exceptions. It's honestly a generational thing. It's something about like people are growing. So yeah, I think the idea, there are some notable examples from history of radical transformation. And I think even India gets undersold a bit. I saw a stat that said 27% of people who received a toilet in Swachh Bharat, the big India program, like weren't using it. But I think actually the incredible bit of that is that the 73%, it's 27 that aren't, 73 that are, 73 that had a toilet built for them now are using it. So it's not as if no one is using them, right? Like, and so I think that's important to keep in perspective as well.
And if you can do that in slums, which is harder, then you have eliminated the flying toilets and the whole environment of fecal matter, which is a big deal.
And then, of course, so the challenging other things like kids, and often, children under 3 or under 5 who are encouraged to just poop wherever they want to, or disabled people who might have special needs and so don't have the, equal access to a toilet. I mean, because the trouble with poop is that you only need one person to poop and contaminate the environment for it to be a problem.
Yeah. So I'm going to run quickly through some slides here. I'll send this to you as a PDF that you can look at on your own. Here's a Gapminder chart I did comparing improved sanitation with diarrheal deaths. And you can see, we're up at the top. So is Thailand. By the way, Thailand many years ago, not that many, 15 years ago, was really bad. But the King of Thailand announced a program and people followed his lead. And now they're nearly 100% ODF free. But you can see, again, the African countries are closer to the bottom in terms of improved sanitation levels. And still they vary widely on the number of diarrheal deaths, from 10 per thousand to 40, 45 per thousand. This chart was one of 2 studies I found years ago that really changed my outlook on water sanitation and hygiene, because I believed then, like a lot of Rotarians do, that if you just have safe water, everyone would be healthy and kids will go to school and life will be good. But if you look at the chart at the bottom, a public water supply, which is often what we provide, domestic taps, in walking distance, makes a modest improvement in morbidity of children 0 to 5. Piped water to homes makes a bigger difference, but I suspect those homes have a lot of other things that make a difference in morbidity, education and better environment for the children. Hygiene education makes a bigger difference by far. Point of use water treatment helps even more. An improved toilet, 34% difference. Hand washing with soap, even bigger. But if you do all 3, a cumulative amount of 50 to 60%. So I switched to only doing 3-legged wash projects, water, sanitation, and hygiene mixed, and have encouraged everybody in our district to do the same. I think most of you know the F diagram, how feces get into fingers, food, fluids, and faces, and the interventions that we use. I like this diagram a little better because it's easier to see how sanitation measures prevent nearly everything except for fingers if they don't do hand washing. So you need hand washing and sanitation together. Some nice diagrams that I've picked up over time. This one was created by a Rotarian in my club, young woman who's now been an assistant governor, is moving to Seattle, unfortunately, but she came with me to Indonesia, and we had developed UDDTs with drying places, and we wanted to show people how it is that our fecal matter, our urine, is food for plants, and how it comes back into a natural cycle. So she did this diagram, and whoops, what did I do that? And we added both English and Indonesian words to it so they could understand. This is some of the ideas that are being developed, mostly spurred by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for managing feces in a way that it is turned into energy, dry materials, water, and doesn't pollute. So this one in particular is the Queensland reinvented toilet design. Here's one that uses a membrane that comes out of China. Some really interesting designs, but I will tell you my personal view of this is that it's going to take a long time for the technology to get smaller, simpler, and cheaper for household use. And until that happens, it's not going to be a good choice for rural rotary wash projects. This is a great poster that shows
Stu,
yes, go ahead, Chuck.
those fancier ones might work well in for these like sanitation, you know, where they've got actual people maintaining them and it's a public thing, and get them up to some scale that they might not otherwise have.
If they're not too expensive and easy to maintain, I would agree. But here's an example of one. This came out of the 2018 reInvent Toilet Show. And look at the guts and the steps that are involved. Pressure up to 25 atmospheres, heat up to 160 degrees, water quenching, I mean, multiple steps. The engineer in me says, that's a really cool thing, but the rotary wash person in me says, how in the heck is that ever going to be maintained and replaced and repaired and kept going for 20 years or 10 years? I don't know. But this poster is a really nice summary of a lot of different facts that relate to why sanitation is so important. Worldwide, although we all know that it's one of the biggest problems, we still have 2.4 billion people, 40% of the population, that don't have safe toilets, and the sanitation systems don't work. And it causes half of the visits to healthcare centers in East Africa. It's a big problem. Millions of children are dying. So this is a nice way to explain that, I think, to an audience. Another nice diagram. This is a UDDT twin pit version. Oh, sorry, that was a fossil alternative. Okay, what's it doing? Yeah. Where you rotate the sides, you can either move the building or have a bigger building with two covers. Let's skip this. Here's a fossil alterna. You can plant a tree. If you have limited land space, that could be an issue, but a lot of people like trees around toilets. Typical VIP latrine. A twin pit with a diversion chamber, a conceptual view, and then a more detailed view, a plan view. This is what we ended up using in Sumba, Indonesia, because our UDDTs were just not well maintained. People had a sense of disgust and they just wouldn't keep them clean and handle the drying feces. And then a school version, multiple stalls, a couple pits. In slums and rural areas, it is difficult to find a way to extract fecal matter. I've got a horrendous picture, which I don't want to share with you, of a young boy down in the pit with fecal matter all over his face, bringing up the bucket of fresh shit. But These kinds of methods, the gulper, the excavator, et cetera, are used to get into places that are not easy to get to with a pumping truck. They're less expensive. They can be done by hand. So that's a nice thing. This is a video that shows a UDDT. I think this one was paid for by UNICEF as an example. More graphics. And then the benefits of corn, the benefits of urine on plants. Corn, aubergines, trees really enjoy urine. The nitrogen, the phosphorus, and other things cause them to grow very nicely. If the handling is done well, it's not a risk for human digestive systems. This is Bill Chapman at a show showing off our 3-hole UDDT pan that was made, custom fiberglass work that we trained villagers how to do. And they'd made them well, and the anal cleansing was actually used. But the problem was that when the drop of the feces down into a basket happened and the basket got full, they didn't want to touch it. And when the urine went into the urine jugs, they didn't keep the tubes tight, and it started smelling, and then they wouldn't clean it. So it ended up being smelling, and then they went back to their traditional toilets. This was his diagram of the replacement. These are the toilets that we use frequently here in this country, and I don't know about you, but I have experienced some of these clogs. I owned a small hotel for 11 years, and we had lots of toilet clogs, thanks to our users. Some other examples of toilets, you've seen that already. So I'll leave that. It's going to talk to us. So let me just show you how this is organized, and then we can talk about any topic that you want. I want to make good use of your time. Basic stuff as to why sanitation is important, what it takes to have a sustainable sanitation system, different toilet styles with some that I particularly have worked with or researched, like UDDTs, twin pits, and vermiculture. There's 2 different vermiculture toilets there that we can talk about, both of which I think work well. The Sato pan I've become acquainted with this last year. It's made in multiple locations in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Africa. And it really makes things simpler for the user interface between the slab and the pit. There's a whole bunch of cultural and social issues. The emerging business model information I found that was requested last time. So here's Sanergy, Sanovation, that fecal sludge management thing. There's an article on Ghana's approach, and then a World Bank article with some case studies and how you get to a business model that might be sustainable. A bunch of sanitation resources that I've found useful, and probably you have as well. Set 1 here is just a collection of stuff I've thrown into a folder over time, so you have access to that. There's a biodigester set that I think Nancy and others collected from TI. There's the Our World in Data and Gapminder. And if you haven't seen it, the newer online training that Rotary has for global grants is actually quite good. Those are the steps. I can't give you a link because you have to log in. But if you enroll in that, I think there's 10 modules. It's a mixture of video, do-it-yourself kind of stuff, and then a self-test at the end, and you get a certificate. And then in our district, we have developed a coaching program, and so there's a description of the program and the 6Q form, which I think I pulled up here so that you could see it.
Stu, I took the liberty of forwarding the 6Q form to Nancy when I saw it on your agenda there last week.
Yeah, and here it is. It is our effort to find the most common issues, the most frequent mistakes, and the keys that lead to a really good, sustainable program early on. So we've given them links to the guides and the forums, and ask them to explain, how are you going to measure this? How do you know it's a good impact? How will it be sustainable? What's the rough budget? How did you select your partners and vet them? So if you find that useful, that's great. And then I've listed what I call insights. They're not all mine. They come from multiple projects, multiple people, but things are often basically misunderstood in the beginning. We come in with our ideas for what it should be rather than listening to the community and seeing all the issues that are involved. There is a process that we Rotarians are supposed to go through, and there's some mesh with the government initiatives and what other NGOs are doing, different toilet styles to consider and factors, using local materials, simple designs, appropriate technology. And then I've listed at the end what I think are some principles that will help gain adoption for sanitation programs and lead to long-term sustainable impact. So you're going to get all this through email. I'm going to stop talking and throw it open for questions and discussion.
I think this last bullet that you just showed with the principles to gain adoption, I mean, this is a behavioral change summary, sort of. Looking at, I hadn't really gone through it like this, but are there any of those you particularly want to point out? They all seem to be good.
It's a mix of behavior change and I would say creating an economic ecosystem so that sanitation can continue. We know that there's a sanitation ladder, that not everybody's going to join immediately. We've got early adopters and stragglers. So training, keeping things simple, training local artisans, helping them become businessmen, teaching them how to market and persuade people. I don't think I have it on here, but having health clubs. We've spent some time in TI and working with a couple centers on health clubs. And of course, school swash clubs. Those are all things that influence this social movement in the community or in the schools. So it's a combination of things. And I think Ben probably knows this stuff much better than I do. There's not a silver bullet or a simple mechanical method in my experience.
This is an enormous compendium of resources to a lot of work. Thank you so much. It will be enormously useful.
I got a little carried away, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that's a perfect way to describe it. That's what I felt last Thursday too. There's so much information here. We should ask you to split it into several talks instead of just one.
Well, we can revisit an aspect, sure. But I wanted to get this to you because it doesn't do any good for me to ramble on and then you've got no resources. I want you to be able to follow up with your own learning and your own methods.
One of the things that's going on here is that in Haiti, there's an organization called SOIL, Sustainable Organic Livelihood.
I know SOIL and the founder real well.
Yeah, so Sasha Kramer's here, right? And so,
yep.
They have an interesting program building an economic model around those composting toilets or not composting toilets, but collecting it and composting it.
Yep.
Separately. And they, so far, have done a ton of work around the economics of that and what people pay for that service and how you make it work. But are always saying, Sasha is always saying that that every waste stream in the world is effectively subsidized, that the users don't bear the whole cost of that. So I just wondered if there's any other, that's what my question was last week, really.
In talking with Aaron Tanner, one of our WASH experts in TI, he has done more research on that topic than I have, and that was what he said, except that there are a couple that are getting close. So that's why I pointed out Synergy, Sanivation, and I think there's another one that are getting close to where they don't need as much government subsidy or donor subsidy. The public has to be ready to pay for this, just like the public had to be ready to pay for water when it came to their tap or their community tap. I mean, until that happens, there's not a revenue source. Yes, you can try and sell briquettes, and you can try and sell fertilizer and urine fertilizer, and biodigesters sell jugs of green brown stuff that's good for plants, but it's not enough income to support them so far. So I think eventually users have to pay.
Yeah, I think we effectively, because in the States and probably Canada, we bundle those services, right? They're bundled with your water provision. And so
yeah, and they're required.
Yeah, they're not, they don't, it doesn't exist that people are paying for them, right? It's a bundled service. So,
well, in my area, we pay for the sanitation service of our rural sanitation supply. And it's $140 every 3 months, something like that.
okay.
They don't recycle the fecal matter. They don't recycle the urine. It's all spread and digested. It doesn't get back into nature, which is unfortunate. And 40% of our water is chlorine-treated valuable water that goes down the sanitation line.
Right. Yeah. I have that comment when I explain that to how things work in other countries here. And the question they said is, you mean you use fresh water to flush your toilet? You use clean water to flush your toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look at water usage, if you compare Tanzania with the United States, we don't use 3 times as much water. Per capita, we use 10,000 times as much water.
That's a shocking thought.
It really is.
Whew.
Of course, we have industry and we have big scale
Most of that's
agriculture.
irrigation, actually, industry and irrigation. So
Yeah, yeah. But still, even in our homes.
Yeah.
So what
Yes.
topics come to mind as things you'd like to kick around, explore a little?
I have a question I'd love to throw out to folks because I've actually never gotten an answer to this, and I'm curious if anybody has it. If you are collecting compost or from composting toilets and you want to test it to know if it's composted adequately, I can't remember the names, but I know there are a couple of organisms that are kind of markers, because if they're dead, you're safe, basically.
Yeah.
Is the only way to know that they're dead using a microscope, or does anybody know how you can do that testing in compost?
I think they would do that. Sasha would be the perfect one to do that, because they do that on a larger scale. But they monitor the temperature over time, isn't it right?
Yeah.
Is it only temperature? Because when I corresponded with her about this, and she said, "Oh yeah, we just look for the marker. These marker. I can't remember if they're parasites or what they are, but I don't know how they know if they're alive or not."
So I'm going to jump in and give you what I know, and there may be others who know better. In our Sumba project, we tried to emulate what she had done by having a little local laboratory where we could measure time and temperature. We had automatic sensors and logs built in these little buttons, had a device to read them, send me the data, and we would be able to tell the temperature, and then I had a relative humidity measure also, of the fecal box over time and as it moved into the solar dryer and how long it took. Dryness and pH are the best indicators that things are dead, but Nancy, you're right. The only way to really know is to put it under a microscope and see, are the E. coli and coliform down to a right level? Are the helminth eggs working? Is Ascaris available?
Ascaris, that was one of them, yeah.
And if they're not present or they're dead, which takes some testing, then it's reasonably safe. But nobody measures that, to my knowledge. The best thing that we were able to come up with was at the Berkeley Livermore Labs, they have a biochip that measures the DNA that comes from bacteria and microorganisms. So you go through a series of processes, and Sasha was a test site for them, and we wanted to be also, but we couldn't make it happen because of the education level of folks. So you go through a process, centrifuge it, bring it down to just the DNA, not the fecal matter, just DNA. You ship it to a lab, and then they analyze it. And they'll tell you what was in the pile that was your sample at that moment, and how much of it might be still alive. And that was as of about 1.5 years ago. I haven't talked to them recently, but they were trying to reduce this down to a mobile measuring tool and an Android app.
Wow.
And if they could, that would be really groundbreaking.
Be very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think they have done that yet.
Huh. Interesting. Well,
I
thanks.
would just add, Nancy, that in areas where you do have the helmets, that they're going to survive a lot stronger than anything else.
Yeah.
And so, if you're in an area where they are present, then if they're dead, then you're pretty certain that everything else is dead. But
So the question is, how do you tell if they're dead?
I think with those you have to look at them.
Look at them and try and grow them.
Yeah.
But
it's the bacteria and the viruses. The viruses will go out fairly quickly, but bacteria can survive for longer periods of time. And if you're just looking at at what time those have died off, then I don't know. But if you do have helmets in there, then you can really monitor.
So I guess the answer there is essentially you're looking at some kind of documented sampling protocol, right?
Yes. And this is a chart that shows what temperature over what period of time it takes to kill various things. There's a lot of these out in the published literature, and there's asterisk there. 1 month it takes 42 degrees Celsius for a month, or 50 degrees for a week. That's considered to be the safety zone.
Which is pretty warm. So,
Pretty warm.
you've got to either build up a lot of heat in that pile or be in a hot country.
Well, and we were doing it with the solar dryer.
Okay. Well, Neil, if you ever run into Sasha and think about this, I'd be very, very interested to know exactly how they test for it.
She would be a great speaker.
Yeah, I can reach out to Sasha.
Yeah, do you think she'd do a talk to the club about what they do?
Sure.
That'd be awesome.
Sure yeah.
And ask her to talk about the evolution from her first visits with Peter Morgan and the fellow who wrote the Humanure book to where they are now, because they've gone through a number of different iterations in their process.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll send an email off to her here and copy you in. Yes.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay.
I think that would be a great topic too. I have not been as involved in it in terms of composting of waste, but obviously in the hospital or medical setting, I mean, you can always determine what's in a sample, but it's very expensive. I mean, you'd have to spin it down and dilute it, and you'd have to grow it on a plate and this kind of thing. We're looking for something, obviously, out in the field that's sort of like the word we were using earlier was a marker or something like that. And it may be an intermediate point between life and death for this particular bacterium or something like that. The other thing is drying is one thing that's important, because a lot of these organisms are not going to live if they're dry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always a component of taking care of the compost. I love the worms, though. You ran through the worms in a hurry tonight.
I did,
Stu, but I love the worm composters, because it just seems like these are something that in certain areas would be extremely useful.
Yeah. So let me talk about those briefly. Vermiculture is worms digesting the fecal matter, and the two that I think are most viable at this point, and I'm not an expert, but one of our TM members and I did a fair amount of research. The microflush toilet was developed by somebody else, adopted by GSAP. They use local materials. It's hand built on the site. It's smaller than a typical toilet box, and it can either be raised if you have wet ground or difficult ground to dig in, or it can be partly embedded or fully embedded, so you have a flat area where you can have somebody come up in a wheelchair. By being smaller, it makes it less expensive for some materials, but then there's the specialty stuff, the handle, the flap, and so on, that bring it up to about $300 to $400 per toilet. I've given you a link to a nice video which features, can't remember his name, Rotarian, who's been really marketing these well in Ghana and now some other countries, and a materials folder that has a bunch of materials. The Tiger toilets originated in Southeast Asia, same kind of idea, a little different construction method. So there's an Oxfam article and study, a USAID article. The worms need to have the right amount of fecal matter coming to them and the right amount of moisture. It's not a really narrow amount, but if they don't get feces for 4 or 5 days, they start dying off. If they don't have moisture for a week, they start dying off. And if you get too much moisture, somebody starts pouring a gallon of water after they go to the bathroom, that will kill them. So to be happy, they have to have, the user has to be trained and follow the method for doing it well. The worms digest the fecal matter and turn it into about 1/5 the original size. And they don't need anything else. You know, they don't need food scraps or anything. They just enjoy the feces. They put out worm castings. And then as a result, the material becomes older and dries naturally. And Michael Anyakase, who's the best trainer in Ghana, tells me that after about 2 to 3 years, you take the cover off and you just dig the dried matter from the edges. The fresh feces are in the middle, avoid those. Dig it out from the edges, and just like the wet technical note says, you scrape some topsoil off, put down the dried fecal matter, put the topsoil back, and it's safe for kids to run on, and it adds a nice soil amendment. So every 2 or 3 years, and then the toilet lasts indefinitely. The pit doesn't fill up because there's no pit. It doesn't use a lot of water. It's easy to clean. It's built from stone or blocks, so it lasts a long time. The biggest disadvantage is so far they haven't figured out how to capture urine separately, but you can do that with a urinal, male or female urinal. You could do it with a little funnel at the front of the toilet. So I think it's a good one. If I was personally going to be in a developing country, I would probably choose either vermiculture toilet or a UDDT.
So the microflush, do they just pee in with the poop?
Yeah, and the liquids, all the liquids, excess water and urine falls through the solids. The solids are stopped by a double screen, mesh. It goes into a channel that leads then to a soak pit. So it's just a small, not even a meter cube soak pit.
Right.
But
they do have a version for high water table.
Yeah, you just put it above the ground.
But then you have to empty the soak pit?
No, then just make the soak pit bigger.
Okay.
It'll eventually soak away.
Okay.
If you were in a flood zone, it might not be a good choice. And I wanted to point out the Sanopan. I learned about that through Aqua Clara Kenya, one of our centers. These are distributed and made in Southeast Asia, in East Africa. It's a really nice, simple little pan. I don't know if I have.
Oops.
But if we go to that link, you pick the country that you're working in, and then it shows you which of the products are available in that country. And you embed this pan into the concrete. It can either be one that sinks a little below the surface. It can be one that has a foot pad like this center one, or it can be a raised toilet if you've got a disabled situation or people want to have a Western style raised toilet. The big advantage is for about $10 to $20, you now have a flap that it automatically works. It's counterweighted. It keeps the flies from coming and going. It has a little layer of water left over from the last flush. It's a very nice little device. I think it's just durable enough, but if it breaks, it's not that hard to dig out the cement and replace it. This works real well in schools.
Jim McGill's had a lot of experience with these. There may
Have you,
be
Jim?
others too. Yeah.
Do you like them, Jim?
We love 'em. People, they like them because they're so easy to clean.
Yep.
So we're even putting them in traditional latrines that you can make them fit in almost any latrine.
Yep.
And then they really liked them because they were so easy to clean.
At our demonstration center, we fitted one to a wood board surface. So we've done it in brick, wood board, and cement.
I'm going to have to jump in here now and say, Stu and crew, if anybody has any questions for now, ask him, or we're going to end the meeting if that's acceptable. And Stu will thank you very much for the talk this week and last. And if you don't mind, we'll keep you on the hook for an open invitation to repeat this or focus it in a different way if you'd like.
That would be fine. And I should probably attend some of your meetings. I would learn.
Oh, I'm happy to put you on our mailing list for meetings, and you're welcome to join anytime.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you were there recently for the Washington healthcare facilities, I think, but you don't need an invitation for that. Nancy can put you on the invitation list and
Okay.
join.
Wonderful.
We're not sure. We're just figuring out how to be an E-club and a traditional Rotary club at the same time. But as you know, Rotarians walk into traditional clubs all the time. We hear the speaker, so walk into ours. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Stu? Otherwise, I'm going to end the recording now. And
Thank you. Fantastic, Stuart. Thank you.